Welcome to the program, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So, can you joining us? So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your history within the Shire,
Sure.
and what are your ties to the community?
I've got plenty of ties to the community. Moved to the south coast to Potato Point in 1983 with my wife Sandy. We've run restaurants for over 20 years, firstly in Badalla, and then we moved the restaurant to Bateman's Bay. Ran the two for a while, but one was enough. And they were Mexican restaurants. They were very successful, and we had a lot of fun doing it. But after 20 years, it was probably time for more youth to come into the situation, and I was lucky enough. I owned the premises in Bateman's Bay, and Hog's Breath Cafe became my tenants up there. So I was encouraged to run for council in 1987. I hadn't thought about it, but someone said I should have a crack, so I did, and I have been on the council since 1987, and my kids went to school in Badalla and then high school in Narooma, and we've got a lot of fantastic friends and all sorts of connections. It's a great community, and with a bit of luck, they'll take me out of Potato Point in a box.
Well, you're certainly in a good part of the Shire. Potato Point is a very special place. So you have a lot of demands on your time, as many of our potential councillors do, and you are currently a sitting councillor, so you probably have a good idea of what kind of commitment it takes to be on council. How will you prioritise your role as mayor if elected, and what kind of time commitment do you believe it warrants?
Oh, it takes a lot of time, and obviously week in, week out, that would vary. But having been Deputy Mayor for over probably 20 years of the time that I've been on council, I've got plenty of experience. I know how to prioritise time and issues. I think one of the main roles too, when you've been in council for a while, is to bring on new councillors so that they become more and more competent in their role. And I don't believe that anyone that heads or is a councillor or heads the council should take the whole of the role. I think it's important to share the responsibilities and move them around, because people live in different areas. I mean, the Shire's about 130 kilometres long, so the people at Turos probably have different priorities to the people at Tilba. So I think you need to take all of those differences and different priorities in the area into consideration, but you need to have an awareness of them and work with the community to bring about the best results that you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point you make about bringing on new councillors. We've got a lot of fresh blood in the water this round. So what's motivated you to run for mayor this time?
I have run for mayor in the past, and I believe that I'd be very efficient in the role. I believe that the experience that I've gained in the length of time I've been there, but more particularly in working through the various systems, whether it be at state government level or federal government level. Local government can only do so much, but the major funding and the funding of major projects comes from particularly the federal government, because they have the bigger pockets, and obviously the state government, and it's important that you work together with those other levels of government to bring about results that we've seen in the Shire, like the new Bateman's Bay Bridge, like the hospital, which is in the planning stages, but we will see achieved within the next 3 or 4 years within Maria. They're vital projects and essential for a growing community like ourselves, but it's important that they're shaped and presented in a way that benefits the community as best it can.
And you do have many ties into government on other levels, on state level and national level, and have other commitments with Regional Development Australia and with upcoming housing projects. Can you just speak to that a little bit about how that may enhance the council's position when they're talking to other levels of government, or do you feel that there might be a conflict with any of those positions and that there might be a change in your role?
No, I don't see any conflict whatsoever. I mean, we're working to get the best result for the whole of our communities, and I don't see, I certainly won't be making any apology for that. I certainly led the council delegations to the state government and the council delegations to the federal government to get the funding which we had, which was $51 million combined for the what is now known as the Bay Pavilions, which is coming out of the ground, the integrated aquatic centre with a cultural centre as well. And there's not a lot of local government areas in Australia that would be boasting a $70-odd million project at this point in time. And so I was pretty proud of the connections that I had that enabled the consideration of our applications to be favourably viewed and ultimately successful.
Thank you. During your time on council most recently, there's been several new projects in the plan. So we've had on our show citizens from Dalmeny, Turos, Browley and other regions of our Shire who have found that their neighbourhoods are being developed. And they've had some concerns about feeling that their voices weren't heard by council when they've gone to present their views. Do you feel that the process in council could be better in terms of relating with the community? And if so, how can council be more accountable and transparent?
I think council is transparent and accountable. If you take, for instance, the Dalmeny land, it has been zoned for urban expansion for 30 years. The people that we've seen Dalmeny, Kayanga, Narooma develop, there is no vacant land, vacant individual blocks of land for sale through any of the real estate agents. There might be the odd one here or there for sale privately, but I'm not aware of it. So it reaches a stage we have to plan for the development and expansion of our communities. It's terribly important. Not everybody can afford to walk in and buy an existing home situation, particularly in the current environment, which is, I don't think anybody has seen an acceleration of values like we're going through at the moment. But so many young people are now in a position, and have been over the years, that buy the block of land, save up, that gives them the equity that can then go ahead and build in a year or 2 or 3 years' time, build a home, rather than being able to accomplish it all in one hit. So we need to make areas available for that to occur. There are more and more people wanting to live within our region. Over 70%, well over 70%, of our region, of our council area, is national park and state forests. So we've got less than 30% of the current area is available for development of any kind. So it's not like you can say, oh, there's another couple of hundred acres over here on the western side of the highway that we can develop. We can't. It's not there. So the areas that have been carefully planned, and all of these planning systems have been on show or gone out for public input over a very long period of time. For instance, the development at Turos was approved over 20, 30 years ago. And whilst what is being put to the public now is slightly different, the actual number of additional blocks is about half a dozen compared to what has already been approved, and that approval is legitimate and can be acted on at some point in time, which is, as far as the folk that own it, now is the time for that. Browley was a little bit different. Browley was a smaller block of land, the part that's caused a bit of controversy of late, and there was definitely a muck-up in the system that has now been righted, that an area that was clearly set aside or intended to be set aside for the community has now been guaranteed that that will take place. But again, if you look at the development at Browley over recent times, Dalmeny as it will come along, they're all areas that people want to be. If you look, Dalmeny is full of people wanting to live there. And
we're very fortunate in our Shire. We live in paradise, don't we?
We do, and and we wouldn't swap it for quids. But when these increasing needs occur, we have to accommodate them. And yes, it does involve change, but you can't have everything. The Dalmeny land has been farmed. It has been logged. This is over a long period of time. The farming ceased because the land wasn't terribly productive. It was then logged. So most of what is there is a regrowth type situation. So it's not like it's never ever been touched or whatever.
It's not an old growth forest. So that actually leads nicely into another question we've been asking our mayoral candidates, and that's about the housing shortage. Some concern about some of this new development is that it's getting snapped up by investors and not by young locals that are looking to build a house and start a family, as you've mentioned, that those are the people that it sounds like council wants to look out for. How do you feel that council can address the critical housing shortage and the need for social housing in this community?
Sure. Look, it has to be an integrated approach. There is no way known that council have the resources to be able to, on its own, cater for the demand. Equally, the state government need to contribute, the federal government need to contribute. There needs to be some levels of incentive put in for people that are private landowners or incentives. But we've looked at lots of these things. Council's been very active in assisting and facilitating sheltered, if you like, or housing to assist people that have special needs. We've been very active in that space, but we don't have the resources. It needs to be the three levels of government together with industry and private investment as to how we can look at what is a huge problem, clearly, about the place. But we need to sit down and work. Council have already made submissions to New South Wales Planning on various ways forward, but until we all sit down and work together, there needs to be, and I repeat the word, incentives to people providing land or builders that it might be building integrated housing, in other words, more than one or two dwellings on the one block of land, to make it a proposition for them as well. Because if you haven't got people making a profit, you are not going to have the ability to look after those that are less capable of looking after themselves. So you need to look at the economics of it. You can't ignore the fact someone making a profit isn't an evil situation, but it does open the way to create the resources to then look at solving the very real problems that exist.
Right. Thank you. We have experienced bushfires, floods, a lot of natural events in our Shire over the last 2 years. As you know, the current council declined to declare a climate emergency. How did you feel about that then? And do you feel any differently now, or would you call a climate emergency if elected?
I feel that actions speak much louder than words. I think you need to look at what council has done in terms of reducing its greenhouse emissions. We're about 2 or 3 years in front of the target we set ourselves in 2018. There is no doubt that life is changing, but I don't believe walking down the main street with a placard or declaring something is the vital issue. The real issue is, what are we doing to reduce the pressure that the world is feeling at the moment from greenhouse emissions, carbon emissions, all of those sorts of things. We need to work at ways to reduce it. We're doing it. We've got an enormous amount of renewable energy going into all of council facilities at the moment. I think within about 2 years we'll just about be 100% renewable in council's use of all the various types of energy. So they're the things to me that count. It's what we do, not what we say.
So you wouldn't declare a climate emergency, but you would put action towards creating a better, greener future.
We are doing that, and I'm proud to support it. As I've said, running around declaring the joint, a nuclear-free zone, not our purview. It's a much, much bigger situation. But doing what we can, like building the Southern Dam to secure the water supply for the whole of the Shire, so that if we are faced with a situation as we were terribly with the fires of 2 years ago, we have got a strong and resilient situation to help the community cope.
Oh, thank you. We're coming to the end of our segment, so this last question, just briefly. The bypass that's coming to Maria and the hospital, those are state projects. So obviously council's control over them might be limited, but how do you feel that you as a mayor could help to influence the progression of these projects?
I think there's been a lot of very real concerns pointed out regarding the bypass. So our job is to advocate to Transport New South Wales that the views of those people, which are very sensible in many and most of those issues, that they're taken fully into account with whatever decision they do make as regards. I mean, it's going to be a big situation. Personally, I think on the north side, you could push the route further to the east and have a lesser impact on those people. As far as the south side, that's obviously there's a lot more individuals affected, and we really do need to listen to all of that. I certainly don't have the answers, but I certainly would undertake to take those concerns of those people and make sure they're well and truly considered.
Right. And just quickly, the hospital. How do you feel that council can influence the hospital project?
I think I certainly personally have already been involved in influencing and creating the new, or what was new in about 10 years ago, the new Oncology and Renal Centre. It's probably the busiest facility of its kind in southeast New South Wales, and we've got fantastic staff. So we've got to make sure that any new hospital is more than adequate to cater for our needs, and also for the obvious growth that the area is going to continue to experience. So any shortcomings should be addressed now, and if that's finance or if it's facilities, we don't want to walk into a new hospital situation with lesser facilities than we currently have in both Bateman's Bay and Moruya.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Big topics this year at this year's election. We'll end this segment with a song. Can you tell us what you've chosen and why?
Oh yeah, I love Jimmy Buffett, and I think Come Monday is a cruisy but fairly meaningful sort of song. And when I'm travelling, and I do travel a fair bit because I've got a daughter in Albury and a daughter in Ballina, I can load up on Jimmy Buffett and watch the miles go by.
Well, this is for all of you who are travelling on your Friday afternoon. Thank you so much. This has been Rob Pollock, Mayoral Candidate and current Deputy Mayor of this council. Thanks for joining us again, Rob.
Pleasure.
So, we spoke a lot about the current situation in our Shire in terms of housing and climate last week. Can you speak to where you think council has done a good job over the last few years and where you think there might be some room for improvement?
I think you'd have to say the last 2 years have been the most challenging that anybody could possibly have imagined. The fires were beyond anybody's previous experience. It was the largest peacetime evacuation in Australian history was the South Coast on New Year's Eve 2 years ago. So to achieve that without power, without any of the normal sorts of things, it was terribly important that we being council, and the integrated situation with the local emergency officer, who was Warren Sharp, who's the chief engineer of the Shire, obviously with the Rural Fire Service, with police and all of the other emergency services, to take that role. We had to personally, or he personally, council, was responsible for getting generators to petrol stations so that we could activate petrol pumps, etc., so that people were able to get on the road and get out of what was clearly a danger zone at this situation. And of course, that all took time, so the evacuation centres that were set up very quickly and under great pressure. We took the roles of facilitating all of those. Was it perfect? No. Was it as good as it could have been at the time? I think it certainly was. And there deserves full credit. But that was just the start. Of course, then we had the impact on all of our local people, the disruption of losing homes, having to leave homes, come back to homes, and then leave homes again. The people that it's bread and butter time for our businesses, they lost all of that, and having to try to stay positive, to try to survive economically, incredibly difficult. And then, of course, like every good fire, you get followed by floods. And, you know, it decimated so much of the Shire. And so I think it was just sensational that we kept all of the systems going. The water kept going, the sewer kept going. In most cases, the actual telemetry or artificial intelligence that runs all of those huge systems was disrupted. So it was the individual and personal physical efforts of our staff, both the, say from the IT point of view, or the guys that went out there and physically turned taps and cocked valves and all sorts of things on and off, that was able to maintain essential services over that period. And they came back from leave, they came back, they worked incredible 7 days, they worked huge hours. And, you know, the whole of the community, it was awesome the way everybody contributed to a major drama, probably, you know, the type that in our generations we haven't experienced since World War II.
Yeah, to a completely unprecedented situation. Well, that's certainly something to take into account for, and to give credit where credit is due to everyone who helped in the recovery from that situation. Is there anything that you feel that council could improve on as you come into the next term?
Look, you can always improve, but I think a lot of the planning work that has gone in, for instance, we lost a huge number of bridges, and instead of rebuilding or temporarily creating situations, we've been able to, through very smart submissions and propositions, we've been able to replace most of those bridges that were lost with cement or concrete bridges. So they're going to, again, be resilient. They're going to withstand any assault, like cleaned up the old timber bridges in the past. So we've done a lot of things there. I think we've had trouble, say, for instance, keeping the gravel roads up to scratch because of the amount of work which has had to go in to remediate and replace bridges and roads that were washed out. So it's been a very difficult time in if you like, the works budget and the operating plan. But I think, you know, we've come through incredibly well, and I thank people for the patience that a lot of them have shown, because a lot of what would be normal maintenance has had to be put on the back burner while we deal with more critical issues. I think not everybody would agree, but I think we've taken on into account people's views, and we've responded taking that into consideration. Well, not everybody got exactly what they wanted, and that will never be the case. But I think if you look at the presentation of the Shire, if you look at the services, you know, whether it's garbage, whether it's they're all, and water, we're planning, we're making accommodation, we're setting up for the future, and the growth down here is clearly accelerating. If you like, the pandemic and all of the disruption of services has proven that people can work from down here now. So there's going to be already an increased demand for people to come down and be able to work from here, which is terrific, because that will improve the spend in the area. So it's important that those opportunities are maximised. We've been able to build in a much better power resilience to our communication systems. Both Telstra and the power companies have made them not so vulnerable. We lost our communication systems over those terrible early days, and it's a lot more resilient now. So we've addressed, when I say we've pointed out the problems, we've pointed out what has been needed to be done by the federal government, by Telstra and the other communication companies, so that we avoid these problems in the future. And that's been a very deliberate and important action that we have been vitally involved in.
Yeah, the volunteers here at 2 FM are definitely aware of communication issues during the bushfires, and so that's very good to hear.
Can I just, you've made a point there about volunteers. This community is absolutely unbelievable, the level of volunteering.
Absolutely.
Right across all the different phases of our community needs, whether it's community transport, whether it's the radio, whether it's all of the SCS, the RFS, all of these people are volunteers. I believe our general contribution for volunteering is way above the average.
And I think the year of Vidal punches above its weight, doesn't it?
It really does. One of the most enjoyable days of the year, in December, we run a dinner or a lunch for all of the people that contribute through our community services division. And we have one of the largest community service divisions in local government, certainly in regional New South Wales. And that's a decision we made some well over 20 years ago to help coordinate the funding and the programs that are available. For instance, Anglicare do a wonderful job. A lot of the church, the Salvation Army people do a lot of jobs. We have been able to bring a lot of those services into our community services division, professionally administer them so that we've got quantifiable results. And as a result, we now have well over 100 people working full and part-time in our community services, delivering all sorts of opportunities and catering for folk that are less than able to look after themselves. And it's just stunning.
Our community really does pull together.
Yep.
Absolutely. So these next few questions, we want to stay on time. We're going to do a couple of rapid fire questions.
Yep.
What's the role of mayor, and how does the mayor's role differ from councillors?
Well, you're the spokesperson. You're the head. So most of the messages that come out from council should be headed and delivered by the mayor.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. In your nearly 40 years here in the Shire, I'm sure you've noticed a lot of changes. And do you think that the changes in diversity are reflected on council? And do you think that council could or should foster more diversity?
Well, I don't think council can foster diversity. It's up to individuals as to whether they want to make themselves available. I mean, I was probably in my mid-30s when I was first elected to council, so it'd be terrific to see younger people. But it's very difficult when you're running a business to give up the time for council. I was fortunate because my particular profession, if you like, I worked at night, so I was available through the day for meetings. We have done nighttime meetings for periods of 3 months, 6 months. I find that it doesn't make any difference to people. People say that more folk would be eligible or find it easier to run for council. People come to council meetings when there are issues that affect them directly. So it's not so much the time of the meeting, whether it's daytime or nighttime. It's the issues and how they're affecting people.
Okay. Can you tell me who you're running with? Who's part of your team?
Sure.
And
I've got a terrific team of 5, including myself. The number 2 on my team is Peter Disco, but Disco was the morning announcer on 2EC for a decade and has always professed a great interest in council and public issues generally. So he's been very keen to get involved and he'll be a real contributor. My number 3 is Jack Tate, who is currently a councillor, and Jack is as absolutely straight as a die. He's a wonderful man. He's not afraid to voice his opinions, and he'll be a terrific contributor as he has already been. And but he's a no-nonsense sort of fella, and he's very, very good value. Number 4 is Robert Motbe from Turos. Robert is currently the president of karting or go-karting in Australia, so he's very interested in motorsport. But with 5 boys, he's particularly interested in opportunities for young people throughout the Shire. He's interested in them being taught responsibility in terms of road and driving instruction. And as a young family bloke, I think he's ideal. And we've got an absolute prize in Narooma with recently retired Jenny Munro, who has for many decades been the leading medical practitioner of the Lighthouse Surgery. And Jenny's contribution to the community has been unending for a long, long time. She's the current president of the Chamber of Commerce and a wonderful lady that's got Narooma running, blood running through her veins. And she just rang, she said, "How can I help?" And I said, "Well, I'd love you on the team." So she took a gulp and said, "Yes, but okay, I'm in it." So she's wonderful. She and her husband Jock have been terrific contributors into the Narooma community for decades and decades.
So you're running as an independent.
Yep.
Recently published in the Beagle was some question around your affiliation with the Liberal Party, and that you've previously been a Liberal member and that you've ran as a Liberal member, and that Jenny Munro is a member of the Liberal Party. Do you still hold affiliation to the Liberal Party, or why do you choose to run as an independent?
I haven't been a member of the Liberal Party for at least 15 years. I have no time for partisan politics in local government of any persuasion. I don't think it's relevant at all. The fact that Jenny is interested and involved in the Liberal Party has no bearing on the independents. She's well and truly capable of making up her own mind as to the priorities within this Shire and what needs to happen as far as encouraging the growth and prosperity of Narooma. So I don't cop any of the criticism regarding it. It's no secret that Jenny's in the Liberal Party. It was on the nomination papers, so that's fine. 30 years ago, yes, I was the Liberal candidate for Eden Monero 30 years ago. My philosophies in terms of what I think is important and looking after people, but having the resources to be able to look after people, haven't changed. and if you can help, you should be helping. But you can't help people if you need resources to bring about a result. So, as I've mentioned in the past, if someone makes a profit, they're in a much better position to be able to assist someone who is not so well positioned and needs that help.
Right. So speaking of some parts of our community that could need help, just with 2 minutes left in our segment here, our community has suffered with COVID restrictions, bushfires, floods. Bypass in other communities has shown to reduce commerce for up to 4 or 5 years. That's not necessarily going to be the case in Maruya, but how do you think that council can help our business community?
Well, I think we've done a few obvious things like not charge for outdoor eating leases and things like that, which, I mean, let's face it, we love our visitors and they love to sit outside and eat. So, you know, that's one way we've been able to reduce the burden on people, and facilitating situations, approvals for people is important. But people, as you mentioned earlier, are seeking diversity, whether it be eating, whether it be accessibility to situations. It might be farm stay. It might be seeing an oyster farmer in live action. They're the things that I think we need to really look at involving. We take things for granted because we live here and we see them every day. Most people buy milk in a plastic bottle. They don't see an active dairy farm. And we are so clean and green down here in all of our product and produce. That's where we need to go. You know, I had 20 years chairing tourism bodies, including the south coast of New South Wales from Wollongong down to the border. It's what we've got in front of us that we need to maximise and make accessible. Things like national parks, make them more accessible to folk that aren't necessarily fit and well and able to hike 20 k's a day. We need to make and have facilities available so that people can enjoy what we have here to the max and to cater for them right across the board.
Yeah, we're certainly blessed to live in an amazing place, and thanks so much for joining us. What song can we play for you today? Well,
I love Jerry Rafferty, and I think Baker Street is probably the seminal track. And I love the fact that Jerry Rafferty and Billy Connolly were in a pub band together way back in Glasgow, which may not have been the most polished area in the world. But I love listening to Jerry Rafferty. He cruises, he's easy, and I've probably got I have got a lot of Scottish background, so I'm very happy to listen to Baker Street.
Thank you so much for coming on the show with us. And